On September the 24th, in 3 weeks' time, there are going to be the big set of German elections. Elections for their parliament, the national parliament, and, of course, the election that will sort out who the next German chancellor is. And it's something that I don't think has been talked about very much in this country yet, but I think it perhaps will after today. Why do I say that? Because today there is going to be, or tonight, there is going to be a big head-to-head between Angela Merkel and her challenger from the Socialist Party, Martin Schulz. So it's going to be a really interesting, fascinating evening. Massive audience expected to watch it. I know both of these characters myself. Mrs. Merkel I've met several times. Clearly very competent. Somebody who many think, without her solidity, that the 2008 financial crisis could have led to perhaps a quite deep collapse in the Eurozone, and people would credit her with that. And they'll say she's been there for 12 years, leading Germany, and she's done a very good job. Others will say that whatever her record, that she ruined everything 2 years ago by saying to people coming across the Mediterranean, we can cope. Germany can cope, regardless how many of you have come. And there are now voices of criticism in Germany saying that culturally it was an inappropriate thing to do, and that in terrorist terms it has made Germany and the rest of Europe a far less safe place. As I say, I've met her, spent time with her. I wouldn't exactly describe her as being a ball of joy, a very serious-minded person, but clearly competent. And her challenger, Martin Schulz, who was president of the European Parliament for many, many years. So to get a bit of a feel for what's going on in Germany, I spoke earlier this morning to David Charter, who was the Berlin correspondent at the Times and the author of Europe In or Out. And I asked him what we can expect this evening.
This is the one and only live TV debate between Angela Merkel and her main challenger to be the Chancellor of Germany, who's called Martin Schulz. And you know Martin Schulz very well, Nigel, because you were in the European Parliament when he was the President of the European Parliament.
I do, yes.
And tried to keep order when you were speaking. And he has decided to switch to German politics and lead the centre-left Social Democratic Party and try and win against Angela Merkel, who's been in power for 12 years. But it's not going very well for Martin, and so this really is being seen as his last chance to really turn the tide against Merkel. Even though the election is 3 weeks away, he's a very long way behind in opinion polls. So we think he's going to try and throw the kitchen sink at Merkel. At least he's got to pull something out of the hat to turn the opinion polls and, basically make Germans switch their allegiance to him.
Now, these are two very different personalities, of course, and I know both of them, but Schulz I know particularly well. But what are the key policy differences between the two? Because I see two figures who are both very pro-European Union, integration, and both seem to support open borders and allowing large numbers of people to come in across the Mediterranean.
Well, that's right up to a point, Nigel, because both of these parties are currently in the government. The German government is a left-right coalition. So it's Schulz's party and Merkel's party. And they, of course, have been in charge through this period where over 1 million migrants were allowed into Germany over the last 2 and a bit years. So there are some huge similarities between them. And it's one reason why Schulz is struggling. What he's trying to do is to find policy differences. So, for example, he has accused Merkel of being close to President Trump because she signed up to spend 2% of GDP on defence. Mm-hmm. And there's a strong pacifist streak in German voters, which that sort of appeals to. There's also a slight anti-Americanism that he's maybe appealing to there, because Merkel is a strong Atlanticist, and she does believe in the US involvement in Europe very much. And extending that, he's also called for all US nuclear weapons to be removed from Germany, because they still have something like 12 nuclear warheads at a base in Germany. So he's tried to push those buttons. And then on the more personal side, he's tried to take a personal attack to Merkel and saying she's out of touch now. She's been governing for 12 years. She's flying around the country in military aircraft. just drops in and drops out again, doesn't really get in touch with people and doesn't really understand what the German in the streets really feel.
So it's
he's tried to present her as out of touch.
It's man of the people, Martin Schulz, is it?
Well, again, you see, this isn't really sticking. I can sense the scepticism in your question, Nigel, because he has spent 23 years in the European Parliament. He hasn't actually done anything in Germany. So it's a big ask for Martin Schulz to present himself as a man of the people.
Nonetheless, there are 20 million people expected to watch this on German television tonight, which is a pretty remarkable thing. And finally, David, in the end, whoever wins this will probably have to form a coalition government with somebody. What are the highlights of the other smaller parties in this campaign?
Right, so the two parties, as I've said at the moment, the two big parties are in government together, but they don't really want to do it again. So that means that if Merkel wins, she's looking at going into government with the Greens, who are quite left-wing, and they're quite pacifist, and would probably like to get rid of nuclear weapons as well. So she may have some tough dealing to do to get the Greens into a coalition. More likely is the more right-wing Liberals. They're called the Free Democrats, and they're doing very well. They were Merkel's coalition partners in the previous government, but then they bombed out of Parliament because it didn't do them any good, and they didn't win any seats in the current Parliament. But they've got a new leader, and he's regrouped the party, and it's possible that she could form a coalition with them. In fact, they want to bring Russia back into the international circuit, if you like. They feel that Merkel's been too tough on Russia with her sanctions and her policy of excluding Russia from the G8, and they think that there should be a bit more of a glasnost, if you like, with Putin. So that could be a very interesting spectacle because Merkel's fallen out with Putin, as you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Eurosceptic Party, how are they getting on?
Right, I think they're doing reasonably well. They're not scoring as high as they did during the massive influx of migrants in 2015, but they're called the Alternative for Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, and they're polling at about 10%, and that feels about right because they're quite strong in the east of Germany, which is more disaffected and has more unemployment and feels a bit left out by the economic success of Germany. But not quite so well in the West. And I think about 10%. They won't go into coalition with anyone because the main parties are trying to freeze them out. But it would be the first time that a populist party to the right of Merkel's Conservatives get in to the German Parliament, so it would be a big moment.
Well, my thanks to David Charter there, the Berlin correspondent of The Times and the author of Europe In or Out, for giving us a proper objective assessment of what is going on in German politics. They've got their elections on the 24th of this month, but tonight is the big debate. And I guess, to be honest, it's being seen as the last chance for Martin Schulz. Martin Schulz, is on the left of politics. They have a further left party called Die Linke, who perhaps are more like the Corbynites in some ways. But Martin Schulz, 23 years in the European Parliament, so I've known him myself for nearly 20 years. We've engaged in the most extraordinary, furious, heated, open shouting matches between the two of us in the European Parliament. He is a fanatical European federalist. He really does think that national flags and national symbols should be replaced by European ones, and that Germany should play a strong central role in it. And you could argue with that position that really politically he and Angela Merkel, they may have slightly different views on tax, attitudes towards America, defence, but on the big European question, there really isn't a huge amount to choose between them. Schulz left the European Parliament. He turned up in Germany. He had a surge in the polls, and he did, for a moment, manage to sell this I'm the ordinary guy, I'm the man of the people thing. It didn't last very long. Right now, Merkel is comfortably ahead in the opinion polls, and I think unless something dramatic happens tonight, and as I say, there are 20 million people expected to tune in, unless something very dramatic happens tonight, Merkel is going to be back. She's been there for 12 years already, and there are some who see the European Union now, frankly, being dominated by one figure. It is increasingly a German-dominated Europe. Why? They're the biggest country, they're the richest country, and they pay the most into the European Union, far more than Britain ever paid into it. But is it, if it carries on this trajectory, is it really in our national interest for Angela Merkel to be re-elected as we head into the Brexit negotiations? Now, on the one hand, you may say, of course it's not, because she will back up the Barnier-Juncker line of demanding large amounts of money. On the other, you might say, well, this German Chancellor, she's got some big businesses that will be relying on her, perhaps to be the broker, perhaps the one person who could come between Barnier and Mr. Juncker. Have to catch him before lunch, of course. But she's the one person who could intervene, perhaps, and say, this needs to change. We need to come to a sensible compromise. And the reason would be, of course, as I've said many times before, there are a lot of German-made motor cars driving around the streets of this country. And I'm very keen, not just to hear from British callers, very keen, anyone in Germany that is listening to this that wants to call 0345 6060 973, or indeed text at 84850, or tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage at LBC, or go to Facebook Live and make a contribution there. Be very good to get some German commentary on this too, if we can. And my first caller on the subject of is Angela Merkel in our interest if she gets re-elected is Martin from Harrogate. Martin, good morning.
Hello, good morning, Nigel.
So what do you think?
Well, I think it's not in our interests
Okay.
for Angela Merkel to get elected. No, I don't. And frankly, it needs somebody really to get between Barnier and Juncker and to sort those two gentlemen out.
Well, surely, given that Angela Merkel is the dominant political figure in European politics, and she really is. I mean, Macron, Macron, it was always the Franco-German relationship that effectively ran the European Union, but Macron is incredibly new and actually is seeing a collapse in ratings already. So could she potentially be the figure that gets in the middle of this and leads to a sensible Brexit resolution, or is her fanaticism for the EU project going to overrule that?
Nigel, I'd like to think so, because it's not only looking at things as they are now, Nigel, it's looking at things, what it might be, say, in 10 or 20 years' time. You've got to look at the whole picture.
Of course. But so you don't really think she's going to do this? I mean, you don't really see her?
I don't think so, Nigel. No, I don't.
No.
Because she's had 12 years. And the way things are going, Nigel, I find myself, like you, banging my head against a brick wall.
Well, don't do that too often, Martin. It doesn't do you any good, honestly. I think I perhaps overdid it a few years ago, which is what led me to getting into politics from business. But, right, Martin, thank you for your call. Martin, very clear. He doesn't think that Merkel is in our interest. Roger says on Facebook, not much choice between Merkel versus Schulz. Both pro-EU, both pro-migration, both pro-globalism. Sadly, Germans don't seem to realise that voting in either of them will be disastrous for their country. Well, it may not be disastrous for their country, Roger, in the sense that, they will be actually the top dogs in the European project, and they will probably enjoy, continuing selling a lot of their products to other European countries. Maggie says, Merkel or Schulz, what a very poor choice for the German people. I think Germany has lost. Those two people are not acting for the goodness of the average German person. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It almost sounds a bit like sort of Trump versus Clinton. Gosh, what a choice. People are always saying this. Every election they say, what a poor choice. My comment about these German elections, knowing both these people, is actually, this is not about personalities. That isn't the problem. The problem here is that actually on the big stuff, and in particular on Brexit, there's nothing to choose. You can't, from what I can see, you can't put a cigarette paper between them. Now, clearly, tonight, on that TV debate, Brexit is going to be one of the big questions because it's the biggest issue facing the European Union. We may get some more clarity tonight. And I really hope that all through today, BMW and all the other big German companies are lobbying both of these candidates to say, look, whatever the divorce with Britain is politically, let's make sure in trade terms we get something right here. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on Sunday mornings, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:18. We're discussing Mrs Merkel's re-election prospects and whether the big TV debate tonight can upset the apple cart and propel Martin Schulz, her opponent, into the lead. It would need to be dramatic. As it is on the current course, she's going to win and win pretty comfortably. I'm asking you, is that really in our interests or not? Now, one of the things that I've tried to do with LBC, and I've been with them now consistently since the first week of this year, here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday nights from 7 till 8 p.m, is to encourage people from all over the world to engage with this, and they do it by going to the LBC website. They do it by going live on Facebook. And if we're discussing America and Trump, or as is with this, we're discussing Germany and we're discussing Merkel, I'd encourage international callers, texters and tweeters. And listening to us via internet radio, that's another way of doing it, is Jeff in Munich. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning again, Nigel.
Good morning.
To find in Munich, yeah? Trusted enemy. You will remember me, maybe.
I do remember you from before.
Yeah?
I do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for responding to my pitch. So, how do you see the big TV debate tonight? Are there going to be any big differences that emerge?
I don't even need to watch it because, I watch German television, listen to German radio. She's going to win a landslide.
Yes.
There is no way at all that Schulz has got the slightest chance at all. And there will be a coalition, and it will possibly be with the FDP or with various other parties.
Yes.
But I don't think that the situation is going to change. But there's one other thing I would want to perhaps advise you of, if that's the correct issue.
Yep.
I think Merkel has been a sleeping giant for the last 6 or 7 months. She hasn't said very much because she knows she's up for re-election. As soon as she's elected, I think the entire Brexit debate will change. I think she will jump into the ring like Rocky, and she will start shaking things up very heavily. And the one thing I hope she will shake up are the rights of EU citizens in Britain and those over here in the European Union.
Which is your position, of course, isn't it?
That's my position.
Yes.
That's one of my top positions.
Yep.
You know, I spent over 2,000 euros. I've applied last week for a German passport. I want to keep my own. I want to know what my status is. I would like to remain British, but, it's a bit like having Manuel Neuer play in goal for England, if you can understand. You can understand it yourself because I think you have... I think your wife is German, as we spoke, and your kids, and, there are issues that you may have with nationality. I don't know. I'm not asking, because those are personal questions.
So she's going to walk it by a landslide, Jeff, and Schulz hasn't got much chance. I think, there are personality issues here. I think Schulz... It's funny, I'll tell you this, Jeff, just after Schulz had announced and he'd got the nomination, he was going to be the candidate, for the left in this election. The SPD had picked him. And he arrived in Germany, and suddenly... this sort of wave of positive publicity. Schulz, as I say, was man of the people. And I was in the smoking room in Strasbourg with a German socialist MEP. And I said, well, your man's doing well, isn't he? He said, yeah, he will do until they find out what he's like.
Nobody notices him, Nigel, because he's not Gerhard Schröder, yeah? No. And he doesn't have that form of charisma and that form of whatever he had. But... as I say, nothing much is going to change, but I think that the lioness will come out of her cave.
Well, on your big point, Jeff. Okay, let's say you're right, and she has been quiet, probably though quite wounded, by so much of the criticism. With 1 million plus people coming into Germany, and now the prospect, of course, of family reunions and everything else adding to that number significantly. Let's say she comes out swinging after these elections. If she was to make citizens' rights the number one thing on her agenda, well, fine. Everyone needs some clarity on that. It needs to be sorted out. The question I'm asking, Jeff, is that the UK is engaged in a Brexit negotiation. Is she likely to be positive for that, or is she going to take the view that actually the UK should be punished?
Well, I've been over here a long time, and I've watched her develop. I've listened to her an awful lot speaking her own language, not dubbed or translated. I know she does speak English. My feeling is that, she is a pragmatist. if that's English or German, I'm not sure. And I think that she is probably the most positive leader in the European Union towards finding a sensible solution with the United Kingdom, a negotiated solution.
Yeah.
If you look at some East European countries, the rhetoric is hard. If you look at France, it goes up and down. Well, I think you know that anyway. I mean, you've got much more experience in the European.
No, Jeff. I actually think, look, I know she is committed to the European project and a huge believer in it and will never criticise it. I understand that. But Jeff, I do actually. I know that I'll get lots of callers this morning, who will leave voters saying, this is terrible, we don't want Merkel. But I actually think of all the people that are currently there in the European architecture, I think she's almost the only one who might just be able to step in and say, look, let's be grown up and sensible about this. It suits all of us. Firstly, as you make clear, from the point of view of clarifying citizens' rights, but secondly and crucially, in terms of ongoing trade, which she knows is in the interest of her country. So, Jeff, like you, I think that she is going to be a hugely influential figure in this after these elections are sorted out on September the 24th. And landslide or not, I'm pretty sure she's going to win. Jeff from Munich, thank you very much indeed for that call. Well, lots and lots of opinion now coming in via social media. When we're out of the EU, who gives a damn about Germany and Merkel, says Joe in London. Joe, do you know, when we're out of the EU, we will give a damn about other European countries. We love Europe. We want to have our holidays and our trade and our cooperation and all the sensible things that good next-door neighbours should want to do. From the Brexit position, what we didn't want to be is governed by their undemocratic institutions. We'd rather do that for ourselves. You're listening to the new Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30 and time. Barring some disaster for Angela Merkel tonight in the big TV debate against her main rival Martin Schulz in Germany, she is going to come back again as the German Chancellor. And I'm asking whether that's really in the interests of our country as we go into the really difficult phases of the Brexit negotiations. But overnight, you will have seen that North Korea has successfully conducted a test of a nuclear bomb. Many think it was probably a hydrogen bomb. It caused earth tremors going through South Korea. And some of the estimates of what was actually tested are pretty scary. I'm not a scientist, but we're told that today's bomb would have been something around about 10 kilotons. That's the most conservative estimate. Others have said it could even be as high as 40 or 50 kilotons. We don't know. But put it into sort of context, Hiroshima was 13 kilotons, Nagasaki was 20 kilotons. So we are talking about, a controlled nuclear explosion today of a very, very huge magnitude. And there seems to be absolutely no dampening down in any way of this continued crisis that the world is facing with North Korea. And joining me to comment on this is Jim Hoare, and he was the British representative to North Korea and a specialist at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the two Koreas. Jim, good morning.
Good morning.
Does this mark yet another serious escalation, Jim?
I think one has to be a bit careful about taking everything at face value. But it is clearly further evidence that North Koreans are determined to go ahead with both a viable nuclear weapon and also the means of delivering it. The rocket tests are the latter, and the continued series of nuclear tests, although this is the first one since last year, show that these two things go in parallel. It's not unexpected, because it has been clear since their first test in 2006 that this was where they were going. But exactly how far they've got, of course, we don't really know. And that is both worrying, but also perhaps a bit reassuring that you don't necessarily have to take everything they say at face value.
No, sure. I mean, I guess the worrying thing for people, Jim, is that, when two sides have a weapon that is capable of destroying each other or even much of the world, I guess the thing is rationality kicks in and it becomes in no one's interests to use it. You are an expert on this regime. Are we dealing here with Kim with a rational person?
I think the regime hitherto has shown that while it is risk-taking, it chances its arm regularly, but it doesn't, so far, appear suicidal. And that whatever it may say it could do or might do, it doesn't do it. But the worry is that with uncertainty on both sides, with edginess on both sides, and as you say, with massive weapons power on both sides, somebody makes a mistake, somebody misjudges, and before you know where you are, the thing has escalated out of control.
Yes, now this today was apparently a hydrogen bomb, and as you say, Kim Jong-un is said to have inspected the loading of one of these into an intercontinental ballistic missile. So he's saying to the world this capability is not very far away. We've obviously seen, Jim, what President Trump has said about the US territory of Guam and any threatening of American airspace or land space. Do you, of all this talk, do you think that China is going to play a bigger role in trying to get the North Koreans to scale back this program, or have we passed that point now?
I think China has always been in a very difficult position. If it tries to put pressure on North Korea, then the North Korean reaction, as indeed the South Korean reaction to any pressure from China, is go away. We don't want you interfering. You used to interfere with our peninsula in the past, well, you shouldn't be doing it now. So the Chinese have to be careful what they say and what they do, because the most likely reaction to pressure on North Korea from China is a continuation of what the North Koreans are doing.
Yeah.
And the Chinese don't want that. They don't want nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. They didn't want them when the United States had them there. They don't want them now. And what the Chinese say, and I think what I would probably say, is that you really have to accept that North Korea is there, accept it's a nuisance, a bloody nuisance if you like, but you've got to deal with it. And that's been the problem with the United States since George W. Bush threw away what Clinton had developed. And it's gone downhill ever since. There have been moments when it seemed to be better, but in the end, it's been a steady decline of contacts between North Korea and the United States, an unwillingness on the part of the United States to deal with North Korea. And yet, somehow, to solve the problem or to contain the problem, you need to sit down and talk with them.
Yes, and we're a long way from that right at this moment in time.
I suspect we are.
Yeah, and I mean, Jim, and this is a very difficult question that you might not wish to answer, but if we got to the point where Trump did take some military action against North Korea, what in those circumstances does the British government do?
Bites its nails very hard, I should say. Yes. The thing is, people talk about, the Korean War never ended. Well, wars end in many ways, and if you have a truce that lasts from 1953 until now, you could say that the old conflict has ended. So there's no legal obligation on Britain, and hitherto we've made that quite clear, as the countries, to go back to aid South Korea if it was attacked. That said, if it was attacked, of course, I suspect people would begin to think about what they should do and how they should do it. It's probably much too early to say what any given country would do in the circumstances. The Prime Minister in Tokyo said that we would stand with the United States. The Australians have said they would stand with the United States. But I think much would depend on the circumstances of a conflict. Now, the trouble is that Mr. Trump, for all his bravado, is faced by exactly the same dilemma as his predecessors. To attack North Korea runs the risk, not, I think, at this stage of retaliation against the United States, but certainly possibility that South Korea comes under attack, and they don't need nuclear weapons for that.
No.
Indeed, that Japan does. In both places, there are a large number of American troops, their families, businessmen, all sorts of Americans.
Yeah, no, this is, as you say, this is very, very difficult to know what anyone will do in these circumstances, but clearly none of this going in the right direction. Jim, thank you so much for joining me this morning and giving us some real inside expertise and knowledge of the North Korean regime, which so few people, I think, in the world have. That was Jim Hoare, the former first British representative to North Korea. Thank you. And back to our debate. Merkel, it looks like she's on for a huge victory in these German elections, unless she trips over badly on the big TV debate tonight. Is it in our interests or not? Charlotte is in the Forest of Dean. Charlotte, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good. So what do you think?
I think she's going to win with a massive landslide, and I don't really think that politically the Germans at the moment really have a decent choice of parties, because most of them, as many others have said, they're pro-immigration, they're pro-EU, and to be honest, they're all pretty much of the same.
Yes, they really are.
Policy makeup, and I feel sorry for the Germans because they really have no choice. And the AfD, I think they've had their problems.
Yes,
I mean, they were what they were.
Just to remind people, Charlotte, and we did touch on this at the top of the hour, but it's worth going back over it. The AfD are the alternative for Deutschland. They are the Eurosceptic party in Germany, not many years old. They took a very strong position back in 2015 on the migrant crisis, the opposite position to Angela Merkel, and they're hovering on around about 10% in the opinion polls. They're much stronger in the east of Germany than they are in the west of Germany. But the significant thing, Charlotte, is that they will break into, without doubt, win seats, quite a good number of seats in the Bundestag this year, and it'll be the first time that a Eurosceptic party has broken into the German parliament. But they have had, and I know what it's like with new emerging parties, they've had splits and splits again, so it is difficult. So she's going to win. Is there any hope, Charlotte, that she might say something positive, Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, about the United Kingdom in our renegotiation?
I don't know. I mean, she's very cagey, so I think she probably might. But to be honest with you, I really and honestly don't trust her, because at the end of the day, she's pro-EU, and as many have said, she's been very quiet recently. And I think that once this is all done and dusted, I think I think whatever's coming, I don't think that the Germans are really prepared for what she's going to do. I think she'll probably, as far as we're concerned, I think she might go hardline on Brexit, because I think she's going to side with Juncker and with Barnier, and I can't see how she can deny some payment. Although, as you say, if she's as sensible as you say she is, then she may kind of try to be a grown-up about it, whereas Juncker and Barnier aren't being particularly grown up.
Believe you me, really. There's no chance of them being grown up about it. None whatsoever. Charlotte, I thank you very much. James says to me on Facebook that Merkel would be much better than Schulz, as he is much more pro-EU and literally hates us because of his position in the EU. I don't know, James, that Schulz hates the United Kingdom and its people. He certainly hates me. You're listening to a brand new edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively here on LBC, and it's 11:45. It looks like Angela Merkel is going to beat Martin Schulz, and she is, once again, going to be the German Chancellor, the dominant political figure in Europe. Is that good news or bad news for Brexit Britain as we get into the crucial rounds of the negotiation? And several of you saying how relatively quiet she's been for the last few months, and how once she's won again, she will flex her muscles. We're just not quite sure exactly how. John is my next caller from Glasgow. John, could she be good news for our country, potentially?
Well, I think it's in the United Kingdom's practical interest to have Mrs. Merkel back, much as I don't agree at all and despise her politics as I do of Martin Schulz and the FDP. Germany has been suffocating in consensus politics for decades, but where Britain's at the moment, Mrs. Merkel's been at the helm for a good number of years. We want her back fairly strong because she represents very much the business lobby in Germany.
Yes.
One cannot overlook the avarice of the German industrial conglomerates and business lobby. And she'll get the deal done. The writing's on the wall. She'll take a pragmatic approach. The tectonic political plates have shifted. The Germans are where they are. They've spun a web in Europe, which they're now stuck in themselves. And they'll look to let us go on as practical and amicable a terms as they possibly can.
Well, John, I hope you're right. And I actually think that you might be right. I'm not sure. As I say, she is fanatically pro the European Union. She loathes any criticism of the European project. And I've seen that, sitting with her at lunch, face to face across the table. I mean, it could have been me, John, obviously, but I have seen that. And but yes, I'm with you. I think there is an economic logic here that probably will kick in. And I think if there's any hope, I mean, when I saw Barnier together on the stage with Davis the other day, I just thought this is a waste of time. I mean, they don't even want to have a deal with us. So, John, I really do hope that you're right. How do you feel the whole Brexit process is going, John?
Well, the whole Brexit process has stumbled from pillar to post. I think that was largely to be expected. We've got Article 50 invoked. The Labour Party have taken a purely politically advantageous change of view as of last week.
Well, you say advantageous. I'm not sure. I think this could really cost them votes in the Midlands and the North and South Wales. And who knows? Everybody says, oh, Scotland. Everybody in Scotland thinks the EU's wonderful. Well, actually, that's far from the case, isn't it? I don't know. But
definitely far from the case up here. I think that was shown in the last election.
Yes.
The SNP were pushed back. At the end of the day, the vast majority of people up here, certainly, they've tried to equate the fact that 62% of people in Scotland voted to remain in the European Union as somehow overriding the need to keep the United Kingdom together, and that is not the case. People up here, if it comes to the choice, the United Kingdom,
I think you're right,
come out ahead of the European Union.
Yeah, I think that particular argument is done with. John in Glasgow, thank you. Great call. Have a good day. Sean in Abbey Wood is my next caller. So, Mrs. Merkel, Sean, good news or bad news?
Bad news, most definitely.
Right, go on. Tell me why.
Well, it's I thought it was the European Union, a circle of stars, all equal. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So why is all of a sudden Germany running the whole roost?
All animals are equal, Sean.
Well, apparently, yeah.
Because Sean, they're the biggest. Because they're the richest. Because she's been there.
It's a union, isn't it? It's supposed to be equal treatment of all parties. Yet she's gone in and she's basically forced Poland out, or she's saying, do it my way or go away. You're not a part of us anymore.
Well, there is an irony here, Sean, isn't there? There is an irony here that one of the major aims of the European project was to suppress German power and dominance within Europe. Now, it was meant to suppress it. It was meant to suppress it militarily.
Where they are, though, isn't it? They're going to end up, and they're pushing for an EU army. They're going to end up with the whole of Europe under German control again. And then you've got all this craziness with America pressuring Korea. To be honest, for all the nutter I think Kim Jong-un is, I think he has just stood there and said, "Leave me alone." That's basically what he said. Yeah, all right, you do bad things in your own country, but it's your country to do with what you will, isn't it? And America has been putting pressure constantly on them. And Merkel's also putting pressure on everyone, isn't it? Everyone's drawing lines, you know what I mean? And now, even they're firing bombs across each other's countries and people are going into nuclear bunkers. It's absolutely insane, and it's like no one wants to say it. No one wants to say what's actually going on, and everyone's scared about it.
Well, Sean, you're not. Sean from Abbey Wood making it clear it's going to be a German-dominated Europe. They're going to run the whole show, including the army. And, Sean, it is difficult to disagree in many ways with that. And joining Sean, David on Twitter says, no, she wants a great big federal states of Europe with Germany running it. Total nightmare. Can't wait to get out. Brexit is a good thing. So there are many who can see she's got these big ambitions for a strong, powerful European Union with them being the dominant figure. But my question wasn't so much today about that, and we can debate that at a future point. My question today was, for the Brexit negotiations, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? And I still think there's a possibility that she might be the only hope we've got of getting a sensible trade deal. I wonder what Jan from Bungay in Norfolk thinks.
Hi, Nigel. I think she's probably going to be the best chance we've got.
Yeah.
I think she's, out of everybody, she's likely to be the fairest. She's done well for Germany. And that is her main... She has to look after Germany, number one. There'd be something wrong with her if she didn't. The same as she's pro-EU, but if these people were anti-EU, they wouldn't be in those governments, would they? She has to be pro-EU. It's logical.
Well, that's certainly been the political consensus over the last few decades, and yeah, I do understand what you say about sort of, you know, she will always put German interests first. I'm sure ultimately, you know, even her great love of the European project, I'm sure you're right. She will probably put German interests first, because it's what human beings do, Jan, isn't it?
I think you have to be realistic about this. Nobody's going to give us everything we want. They'd be crazy to.
Well, no, we don't expect everything we want, but what we do ultimately need, Jan, with our renegotiation, or ideally what we need. I mean, look, if they're going to go on behaving the way that Barnier did the other day, we at some point are simply going to have to walk away and say, forget it. You know, we will go to we will go to WTO rules, but we'd all rather have a grown-up trade deal. And Jan, I'm with you. I think she represents the best chance that we've got of doing that.
Well, I think it's far better than most of the others.
Yeah, right.
Look,
well, no, Jan, I'm going to have to let you go. Time is pressing, but thank you for that call. And you know, I think Jan from Norfolk really being a pragmatist about it, and that is the view I think ultimately that I take from our perspective. Barbara in Edinburgh is going to be my last caller on this subject. Barbara, Merkel, I think we can pretty much say now she is going to win, unless something dramatic happens. Could it be in our interest, possibly?
Possibly, yes, because I think they've been stalling and just waiting for the elections because they know she's going to win. They've been stalling in the negotiations, and I think she's very powerful. For what reason, I really can't understand it, but she seems to be very powerful, and it could be, not that I particularly like her, but I think better than Schulz for Brexit.
Well, I think, you know, Barbara, she is... You know, why is she so popular in Germany? And she still is, despite people hugely criticising what she did over the migrant policy. She is still popular. You know, she's called Mutti, Mother. I mean, it's because she is solid, dependable, reliable, and barring that one catastrophic, in my view, catastrophic policy mistake that I think in the end will become her legacy, I'm sad to say. Amazing, isn't it? You can have an exemplary career in public life and politics and you can blow it just with one big decision. But I think despite all of that, Barbara, she has been solid, dependable and reliable. I'm just hoping that she'll listen to the voice of German business. She'll think about German jobs and she'll knock heads together with Juncker and Barnier and say, come on, let's be sensible. I can't guarantee it, Barbara, but I think there's at least more chance of that than with anybody else, don't you?
I agree. Definitely.
Good. Lovely. Well, listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Yeah, well, look, I think it is a debate you're going to see a lot more of over the course of the next few weeks. The German elections will become a bigger and bigger issue, even though it looks like she's pretty much a cert to win. But that's one of the things that I will try to do with this show on a Sunday, where I've got some more time, is not just to talk about the last week or today, to try and point and look ahead at what's coming in the next few weeks. So you've been listening to the brand new Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7 o'clock with the show that I've been doing now for some months. And don't forget, you can listen to LBC whenever you want, wherever you are, by downloading the free LBC app. Do it on your mobile or your tablet and never miss a moment with LBC Catch-Up app. Leading Britain's conversation at 3, it's Stig Abel, but up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm seeing a lot of you now, I think.
I know.
Coming up, thousands of state primary schools are allowing girls as young as 5 to wear the Muslim religious headscarf as part of approved school uniform. Meanwhile, John Lewis has announced that it is removing boys and girls labelling from its clothes. Are gender-neutral progressives avoiding the elephant in the room, fundamentalist Islam? Before that, ex-offenders would be able to seal their criminal record so they don't have to mention past convictions at job interviews.